In this video, we'll have a look at skipping blank cells in charts using dynamic formulas. Now, this approach is not just for blank cells, but it's also for skipping error values as well. So not only do we not plot them on the y-axis, but we also don't plot them on the x-axis. Let's take a look at option 2 of ignoring blank cells by doing this all in a dynamic way. And by dynamic, I mean we are going to add a data appropriation table in the middle that our chart is going to refer to. And in this data appropriation table, we are already going to filter out the blanks. So it's going to be a very nice, dense data appropriation table that's only going to include the cells here where we have a date. And I need these two right here. Okay, so the first challenge is to come up with a formula that when I drag it down, it's just going to exclude these lines. The formula that comes to mind in this case is an index formula, because index is great for returning whether you have text or numbers. In this case, they're both numbers because date is pretty much a number. But even if you had text here, it has no problem to return any of these, right? So it's a great lookup formula in that respect. If you're not familiar with index, I have a series on this. I have the index match basic series and index match advanced. I'm going to put a link to these videos in the descriptions below. So make sure you check that out just so you fully understand the power of this formula. Okay, so index could work here. What it needs as a first argument is the array, and always think of array as the area where your answer is. In this case, where is the area that my answer is? If I'm typing the formula right here, I want a date, right? So my answer can only be a date, and it could be a date anywhere in here. And I'm going to pull this formula down a bit more because I could add in more stuff here, and I still want my chart and everything to work fine. So depending on how much data you have, you can pull this down further. In my case, I'll just leave it to that. I'm going to fix this. Now, the next argument in here is the row argument, and that's pretty much the only argument I need here because I just have one column, I'm not going to move anywhere. I just need to get the right argument for the row argument. So if I would put 1 here, that means return the first in there, right? That should be my first date. It's just not formatted as a date, so let's get the formatting here. If I pull this down, I do want the second date to come and then the third date, but only if it has a value. I could do something like this, make indexes here. Let's just pull this down. And instead of saying this, I could reference this cell and go down. But obviously, I need to make an exception and say the moment it's empty, skip that. That's something I need to do here for these indexes. I need to give this index function the correct address every time I move down. In the first instance is fine, number 2 is fine, but when it comes here, when it actually comes to the third position in the data appropriation table, I want it to move 4 down. So this should be a 4 when it's right here and not a 3, because otherwise it's giving me 3 back, which is empty. The challenge here is to come up with a formula that's going to give us the right result for the index function. One thing that comes to mind is the row function, right? If we could somehow figure out the row that's empty and filter it out, we could get that. But not just with the row function. We could use another function together with it, and that would be the small function. So let's think of it like this. What if when we're here on position 1, we return the smallest row of this whole section? What's the smallest row? Number 36. And then we return the second smallest row. That's going to be this one. Now, if we return the third smallest row, we're going to get 38, right? So we want to filter it out. That's where our criteria comes in. We can say return the first smallest row as long as it's not empty. Then return the second smallest row as long as it's not empty. So then that should give us 36, 37, and then when we come here to return the third smallest row that's not empty. What number would that be? 39, right? Now we have an idea how we could handle this, but how do we plug this in a formula? Well, that's when the playing comes in to figure out the best formula here. Because I'm going to have an if, like if this is not empty or if this is empty, do something. The moment I plug an if in there, it's going to become an array formula that's going to require Control-Shift-Enter. So even if I use the index function and I have an if in there, it's going to require Control-Shift-Enter. And to avoid Control-Shift-Enter, I can use another way of handling this. I'm still going to use the small function, but I'm going to use the aggregate function. Okay, so I'll just type it right here so that we can get the correct rows here. Once we get that argument for index right in this section, I'm just going to copy and paste this formula in there. Okay, so the aggregate formula gives us a lot of different functions that we can use. So let's just go back and take a look. Right here we can see the large and the small. As the next argument, now this is something really powerful with aggregate, and that's going to come in handy in a second, is that it can ignore error values. That's a great one to use. Now, it doesn't matter in my case if I want 2 or 3 here. Let's just pick one. I'll go with 3. Then it's the array. Okay, so the array that I'm going to feed the small function is my rows, right? I want all these rows in there, and then I want to get the first smallest row, the second smallest row, and so on. So that array is going to be the row argument. And I'm going to highlight this. So let's go and be consistent. So I'm going to highlight this to 60 and press F4. This function is going to generate numbers 36, 37, 38. We can actually take a look at it if I highlight it and press F9. These are our row numbers. I'm going to press Ctrl Z to go back. Now I could say return the first smallest. Again, I'm just going to highlight these indexes. When I pull this down, this is row 37, row 38, row 39. Until now, I haven't given it any criteria, right? But I want to give it now some criteria that's going to make it ignore this 38 and put the 39 up here. How can I do that? Well, this is something I learned from Mike Girvin's CSE book, Control-Shift-Enter, is the power of division to filter things out. If I divide this 36 and 37 and so on by ones and zeros, right? So if I divide this by 1, if it has a number, and then divide this 38 by a 0, what do I get? I get an error, right? And then I can use this 3 option here is going to ignore those error values. So I'm going to basically create now some type of array that's going to be ones and zeros. As a first step, when you're checking like if a cell is full or not, if it has a value in it or not, Excel returns true or false. Like, does it have a value? True. If it's empty, false. That's the criteria. I'm going to put my criteria in brackets. I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to press F4 and say does not equal to nothing. Right now, at this stage, what do I get if I press F9? True, true, false. Has value, no value. False. It's not ones and zeros. So how does it translate this to ones and zeros? Well, the division here is going to force it to turn into ones and zeros. So the moment you do a mathematical operation on true and false values, you get them to be ones and zeros. If I take a look at this now and press F9, look, we have 36, 37, error, 39, 40, and so on, then error. And here we have a bunch of errors because they're all empty here. Okay, so I'm going to press Ctrl Z to go back. Now, I'm still highlighting this index values, right? So let's pull this down. Look at this, 36, 37, 39. It skipped 38. Okay, so that looks great. Now, as the next step, what I'm going to do is replace this with a function that's going to give me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on back. And that could be the rows function. It doesn't really matter what column you pick, but just to be consistent, I'm just going to stay on this column here and do rows of this to itself. And I'm going to fix the first cell reference by pressing F4. Okay, so what does this give me back at this stage? 1. The moment I pull it down, it's going to give 2 back and then 3 back. So these results don't change. It's all I did is to get rid of this so that I don't need to use indexes here. Okay, because when I'm right here, what number would this be? Let's just take a look. I'm going to press F9, 6, right? It's giving me the 6th position back. Press Ctrl Z to go back. Now I have my rows here, but could I plug this in the index function right here? Could I use this as is? I can't, right? Because I'm going to index this and say move down 36 rows. That's not what I want. So the next step is to translate this to start from 1 and not from this row that this table happens to be sitting on. I want to start always from 1. So which part of this formula do I need to update? This part, right? So this is the part that gives back 36, 37, and so on. All I need to do is deduct the header row, this one, and I have to fix this. So then it's 36 minus 35, 37 minus 35, and so on, and that's going to give me 1, 2, and then 4 back to the index function, and then 5 back, and so on. So this looks great. All I have to do is to copy it and plug it in for my row argument right here. Then let's just pull this down. If I've done my fixing all correctly, let's pull this down to here. That's fine, there is nothing here. Now what I could do is to just wrap this up in an if-error formula. So if the result of this is an error, just give back nothing. That was that. Now the hard work is done here. All I need to do is to do a similar thing for this one to get the values back. I could also just do a normal index and match to get the right values back here, right? Because all of these are unique. So let's just do an index and match to practice that one again. We actually want values back. So I'm going to index the values area because my answer could only be a number in this case. Now, how many rows do I want to move down? Well, that's going to depend on where this one is. So that's where I can use the match function. And my lookup value is this one. Okay, I don't need to fix it. Where is it looking for this one? It's looking for it in here. Okay, so make sure we're in sync with our index area. Now I do need to fix this, and I want a perfect match, so an exact match. And I'm going to close that, and those are my values. Let's just double check. That's right. That's right. Okay, so now that I have my values, the challenge here is to insert a chart. Now, if your chart size doesn't change because your data is always until here, that's fine, but it's very likely that you get new data, that the data is different, something disappears from here, and so on. So let's just make sure this looks okay. So that's 1, 2, and then again 3, right? So it did that thing that we saw in the last lecture. Now it's trying to fill in the gaps because it's being smart, but we don't want it to be smart, so we don't want it to fill in the gaps. So what do I have to do here is to turn this into a text axis here. Okay. Now, what I do want to happen is that every time I add new data to this, so let's say I get the data for the next day, it's popping up here, but I want it to pop up in my chart as well. Now, one thing I need to check is I need to bring in these formulas actually all the way to the bottom, because that's what I did for the dates. So I need to bring it all the way to the bottom. And again, we run into the same thing that we get errors here. So we could wrap this up in an if error, or actually we could say, instead of if error, we can just do an if and say, is this cell, this one, is this equal to nothing? If it is, then do nothing. Otherwise, do the index thing. Okay, and we pull it all the way down. Okay, so now anytime we get numbers here, then these will also populate in here. That's all good, but what about our chart? We need this to update. Now this is where we could make a dynamic chart that's going to expand and contract based on this data set. And because we can't have formulas for our data series here, so we couldn't just go in and plug a formula in here, we need to actually use Name Manager for that. Now I have a video on this, and I'm going to put the link to it in the descriptions below. That's going to show you another side of index which you can use for these type of cases. We used index right here, we used index here, and in both cases we returned the number, the cell value in there. But the moment you use something like index to index, you actually return the address. So you return like A36 and so on. We're going to use this version of it and use that in Name Manager. We need to create a name for date and we need to create a name for values. Normally when I use Name Manager, because you don't get this Excel help in there, I type in the formulas here. When I'm happy with them, I copy and paste them in Name Manager. Let's see, what type of formula do we need for date? Well, the first cell is fixed, right? My data preparation table is always going to start from here. So it's actually going to be equal to, what is that cell? It's E36, and I'm going to fix it. The to part, that's where it needs to be variable, right? It needs to expand and contract. And right here, I can use an index function. Where is the array that it should look for? Well, right here up to the end of where I think I can have data. I think I selected this much, I'm not sure. If I selected 60, yeah, you have to be in sync, right? So if you add empty cells here, you need to also add empty cells in here. So I'm gonna use this, I'm gonna fix this. So that's my area. How many rows do I want to move down? Well, I want to move till the last row. I'm not gonna have any gaps in here. So which formula could work well here? The count formula. So I can count these, and I'm gonna fix, and I'm gonna use the count as my row argument. No match needed in this case. So let me just make sure I have everything done correctly. It looks fine. Let's just highlight this, press F9, and then we can see the whole array. In the cell itself, you might get an error, you might see value, or you might just see one number. This is the number that we're seeing. So it just can't put all those numbers in one cell. But it looks like it's working, and I have fixed everything except this. So I do need to fix this, especially if you're copying and pasting to Name Manager. For the values, I basically want a very similar formula. Let's just type in the one for values here, except I don't want to start from E, I want to start from F, and I want to index the F area, but my count can still be on the date here. That part I don't need to change. Okay, so highlight, press F9, and we get our numbers. These look good. Let's just take one, copy this, press escape, go to formulas, Name Manager. Okay, we're going to add a new name. Now, don't forget what we type here. I'm going to put my date. The first one I think was date that I copied, and say okay. Now, when you click here, then we should see everything highlighted. So that really looks good. I'm happy with that. Let's go to new. We call the second one my value. And I just didn't go back to copy the other one, but it's easy to change these. This is the F column, and here F and F, right? We say, okay, we can click on it. That looks good. We're nearly there. All we have to do is update our chart to take these new names. So we're going to go to select data. First, let's do the values. Doesn't matter which one you do, but don't forget you have to do both. You have to do these values and the x-axis. So here we're going to delete this part. Don't delete the name of the sheet that you have. Leave that there. Otherwise, it's not going to take it. This was my value. Okay, and don't forget to edit your x-axis as well. And this was my date. The new date is there, and these look good. Let's just do some testing. Let's take out the 19th. Okay, 19th disappeared. Let's add dates to this. I think I did until 60, and let's just put in some numbers. 23, 24, right? So it all updated. Well, that is a lot of work to create such a dynamic graph because it required two steps. One step, create a data preparation table, use these more advanced Excel formulas, then create new formulas that you can use for Name Manager that's going to feed the chart. It's worth the time if this is something that you use on a continuous basis. And the best thing is that you need to set all this up just once, right? Once you have it, you can use this on other data sets. And of course, you can download this workbook from the descriptions of this video. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a thumbs up. And for more of these videos, why not subscribe to my channel for updates when new videos like this one come out?